With names like that, Tasmania, you really don't help yourself, do
In the
you?
description. We have already covered Australia's relationship with names in the past, and I've been taking tongue-in-cheek jabs at them ever since. In that video, I summarised that Australian place names can be put into two main categories. There's the incredibly obvious literal place names like Western Australia, and places that hold on to native Aboriginal names like Bondi. However, there's actually something of a third side to this Australian nomenclature coin, that being weird and rude names that litter the nation. Whole maps have been created to highlight the bizarre names of the land down under. While these names can be found across the entire country, there seems to be a higher concentration of these odd names in one particular area of the nation, that being on the island of Tasmania.
It is a good point. Western Australia, it's not really very kind of original, is it, really? Western Australia. Yeah, it's not very original. But Tasmania. Let's find out some of them, shall we?
Yes, the island of Tasmania is a state of Australia, which many of you like to inform me of when I forgot to include it that one time. It seems that many people just presume that Tasmania is a wilderness island, and while it does have stunning scenery and very unique wildlife, presuming it's just an uninhabited island is far from the truth. It has a population of over 500,000 people, and is the 26th largest island on our planet. It's around the same size as Sri Lanka. The island state is also home to some of the world's cleanest air and the world's oldest trees. As for that name, well, it's a creation of European origins. Tasmania is named after Dutch explorer Abel Tasman, who sighted the island in 1642. He, however, actually named it Van Diemen's Land.
I do find that brilliant. The Van Diemen's Land then got turned to... Imagine if it was still called Van Diemen's Land. That's a weird thought, to think if it was still called Van Diemen's Land.
In honour of Governor of the Dutch East Indies, Anthony van Diemen. The name Tasmania began life as a mere nickname for the island, in ode to its European founder. However, the name started to become more popular than the actual name and was officially changed in 1856.
Well, how many of you knew that? How many of you knew that Tasmania started as a sort of a nickname, but stuck and actually officially got changed?
The island was inhabited way before Tasman even sighted it, and its original Aboriginal names include Trawuna, Trawena, and Leo Trawita. While Tasmania was once its nickname, it now has a different nickname, the Apple Isle. I've read two ideas as to why the island has this nickname.
There's me thinking its nickname was the Lady Garden, but you know, maybe maybe he doesn't want to mention that in this video.
One being because in the past, the island was an important apple exporter, and the other idea being simply because it looks somewhat like an apple. Of
not
course,
really.
While it's all well and good to look into the name of the island as a whole, we're really here to look into the specific names of settlements on the island. And this phenomenon of weird places in Tasmania can really be encapsulated in this map of the island. This small map has really made its way around the internet, and yes, I've been sent it a handful of times.
Now, let's just have a quick gander. Funny Knob Creek, Pisspot Creek, Little Hell, Ooze Lake, hang on, Beggary Bumps. Who comes up with this? Mossy Nipple Bend, a Crackpot, Misery Knob. There's a place called Promised Lands. Jesus Christ. Who comes up with it? Prickly Bottom. I think there's a Prickly Bottom in England, actually.
It's actually part of a much larger map of weird Australian names as a whole, created by the Marvellous Maps company. They have maps of other countries with weird names too. Go check them out. They aren't sponsoring this video or anything, but I'm hoping if I say nice things about them, they may send me a free map or two. Anyway, it's
I've tried that with Fruit Chocks, and I even emailed them, and they're not going to send me. They're not going to send me lots of Fruit Chocks. It's so disappointing.
understandable as to why this map has become so popular to share on the socials. Just look at some of the names we have going on here, from Shag Head,
Granny's
Wombat
Gut,
Flat, Little Hell, Pisspot Creek, Granny's Gut, Deep Fort, the Never Never, the Nipples, Snug, and Big Trumpeter Bay.
I can only assume at the time that they were actually made up, these names, those words mean something completely different. For example, you say the word gay. Well, gay doesn't mean happy anymore, does it? It means someone who likes the same sex. So that would be my only assumption, that before, when they were created, they didn't mean what they mean now.
To name a few, the island is home to names that would make even the most respectable person smirk. How exactly did this island end up with so many weird and rude names? Of course, Tasmania/Australia isn't the only place with rude names, and there's a select few reasons as to why place names can seem rude to us now. A prime reason is because of old words picking up new meanings.
There we go.
Shag Head, as we just mentioned, a place in Tasmania. Or shag is now a word we link with copulation. Initially, shag was the name for a family of birds, and still somewhat is. I wouldn't be surprised if the shag mentioned in this name relates to the bird, though as years went on and shag took on this new meaning, the name became much more comical. As for the head part, this is a common term we apply to land by water. There's also a shag bay on the island too. Another reason why names can seem rude to English speakers is because an unassuming word in a foreign language can sound rude to us in English. While these ideas explain the occasional odd name, it doesn't help us with understanding why odd names appear at such a large scale on the island of Tasmania. Plus, it really can't explain some of the odder names on the island, like Eggs and Bacon Bay, Lovely Bottom, and Ding Dong Rainforest.
Yeah, why would... Surely, if I say about the meaning of words don't mean what they do now, and you think Eggs and Bacon Bay, well, surely eggs and bacon meant roughly the same thing even when the names were created. So why the hell would it be called? Does anyone live in or buy Eggs and Bacon Bay? I know I've got people that watch me from Tasmania, so please, if you live near there, do they just supply lots of really good quality eggs and bacon or something? Because why would it be called that?
As to why they are so prevalent here, we don't seem to be too sure. When looking into this, there are countless articles poking fun at these names, but no one was really asking why they are so odd and so frequent. So for this one, I have to go into more name theory than name explain. What I'm about to talk about is an idea of my own creation, with little to no actual evidence. That's something I really want to make clear. While I primarily enjoy giving you guys the facts, sometimes the facts elude us and we have to go into tinfoil hat mode. So what's my theory as to why these odd names are so commonplace? Well, it kind of roots from this single sentence I found on the Discover Tasmania website and their page about the island's odd names. They say these unusual place names reflect the island's colourful history, and when I think of colourful history in Tasmania, Australia's convict past comes to mind. Australia's history of convicts has become muddled over the years. A lot of the time people like to boil it down to the stereotype that all Australians are just descendants of thieves and criminals, and they let that paint their entire impression of the nation. Of course, we shouldn't base our idea of an entire nation on a stereotype, but British convicts being sent there does play a role in the history of Australia.
But the interesting thing, as we found out when I watched a previous one of this guy's videos, is that yes, a lot of convicts were sent down, but they also needed to send the people to work and actually run the prisons. You then had the upper class and middle class going across, expecting wealth and money and to be able to run the places. So actually, you would have still had such a mix. But we do have the idea, I think, of Australia just being for convicts, when that's not necessarily the case.
It's believed that 1 in 5 Australians today can trace their lineage back to a convict. Britain started sending convicts to their land in the 18th century. This was post-industrial revolution, and the landscape of Britain changed drastically. Small villages in the British countryside were abandoned as people flocked to the big cities for work. And while there was work in these post-industrial revolution cities, there simply wasn't enough for everyone. So these cities became squalid and overcrowded with the unemployed who had no work and no money. This created something Britain had never really seen in a large scale before, and something it still struggles with to this day: urban poverty. These people turned to crime simply to survive in this now changed world. They had to steal food to feed themselves. Of course, these crimes were taken seriously, and the authorities had to deal with these new troublemakers one way or another. Serious crimes were punishable by death, but for petty things like theft, a prison sentence was installed. Soon enough, Britain's prisons were at max capacity. Britain simply needed somewhere to put all their inmates that their revolution created in the first place. With an empire at its fingertips, there had to be somewhere they could send them, right? To begin with, Britain actually sent their convicts to the Americas, but after a few battles and some catchy tunes, that wasn't really an option for the UK anymore. Australia, or New Holland as it was called at the time, was already known of to Britain. James Cook had mapped it out years before, and it seemed like the perfect place to leave convicts. Not only was it empty in their eyes, obviously they ignored the Aboriginals who had been there for thousands of years, but the harsh, hot environment and the 8-month boat trip made it seem like a very suitable punishment, even for just stealing a loaf of bread. Life was tough for these initial convicts down under, trying to figure out how to farm the land with food in short supply, and once their sentences were carried out, these convicts weren't sent back to Blighty. Rather, they lived their life in Australia, carrying the stigma of their crimes. Over the years, this shame in their history has become a point of pride in Australia, and a brighter light has been shone on the harsh conditions these convicts had to endure at the hands of the British Empire, especially for the trivial crimes many of them committed in the first place. Transporting...
I would like to say that is the interesting thing, actually. From looking at the history of the convicts being sent over, a lot of them were sent over for the smallest of crimes. You know, your family is starving and you've stolen a loaf of bread or something like that. Maybe that's why it's Egg and Bacon Bay. Egg and Bacon Bay, it was Bay. You know, that some convicts stole some egg and bacon to feed their family. And yeah, it is shocking at some of the minimal things people did and got shipped over. And, you know, 8 months boat trip, trying to then having to survive, and actually there's no way back. So it is interesting. There's a lot of history behind it.
Deportation of convicts to Australia started in 1788 and ended in 1868, with 160,000 British convicts being sent to the land. From what I read, 70,000 of these people were sent to the island of Tasmania. It was in 1804 that the first convict ship landed on the island. Who knows if life here was any different to the lives of convicts on mainland Australia? Were they sent to the island simply as there was space there, or was Tasmania seen as the next step up? When being sent from the UK to Australia wasn't enough, they had to be then sent to an even more remote location. Either way, Tasmania made itself home to many British convicts who led their life there, and places settled by convicts can still be found all across the island. Now I know what you are thinking. What has Australia's convict history got to do with a whole lot of weird place names on the island of Tasmania? Well, not only did it help bulk out this video, it also plays into my theory as to why there's so many weird names on the island. And once again, remember, this is just my own theory. But if there's any group of people on our planet who are going to give a huge amount of places weird, silly and rude names, surely 18th and 19th century convicts of urban Britain from low income backgrounds have to be a prime contender, right? I can just imagine the Dickensian archetypal crook giving somewhere a name like Grassy Bottom, Ass's Ear, or even Humongous Hole. Place names in the New World, and I'm not quite sure if Australia counts as the New World, but you get the point, are usually bestowed upon from quite lofty places, and have respectable origins. Think of the South American nations or Australian settlements named after important figures. All the names simply come from ancient roots which we have held onto. Tasmania, however, didn't really have big wigs or fancy governors to guide its nomenclature, especially for its lesser known areas. What it did have, however, were convicts.
Maybe that's an interesting point. Maybe you do have places with the UK names and named after important people from the UK, from Britain. But it's maybe the smaller locations are where the convicts ended up, in the fact that after their crime punishment had been kind of fulfilled, they, you know, maybe they left the bigger what they call towns then, to start their own little locations, and that's where the name. So the place where the governors and the elite they stayed, they had the more important names. And then where the convicts ended up after they had finished their punishment, maybe that's when you find the silly names, the grassy bottom and things like that.
I can't help but feel that British convicts from poor backgrounds in the 18th and 19th century wouldn't have put the same amount of thought and finesse into place names as governors, politicians, liberated peoples, and name nerds in general would have. Instead, they may have just given places easy to understand names, or even silly and rude names as those words were in their lexicon. These names may have even been a way to find some humour in their otherwise tough lives as convicts dragged to the other side of the world. Hopefully, these names brought a smile to their faces, in the same way they bring a smile to our faces today. Like, there's a mountain on the island called the Nipples. Who do you think is more likely to name a mountain this? A fancy mountaineering survey team, or some working class inner city English convicts having a laugh? Though maybe this is a huge disservice to the Dickensian convict to presume they were all dumb and gave places rude names just to get a kick out of it. As I stated many times, this really is just my own theory on the matter as to explain why there are so many odd names on the island. If you have your own theory as to why this is the case, then I'd love to hear it down below.
It certainly does make sense what his idea is. If you look at a map, there are plenty of places with, old school British names or named after, as said, of, wealthy Brits. So maybe, as I said, that is where the governors and the upper class, where they ended up staying. Whereas afterwards, would a convict or a convict who has just finished their kind of punishment, would they want to stay surrounded by the elite? I don't know. Maybe they wanted to move away and therefore create their own town names. I don't know. But it's an idea.
Maybe we can get a better idea as to why these names are so odd if we look at them on an individual level. I'm sure many of you came here just to hear some of these silly names, and while I've shared a few of them, this video really hasn't been that. Apologies. I wanted to find out why these names are so common, not just laugh at them. There's enough articles out there doing just that. Though to share a few actual etymologies of these names, we have Snug, which is believed to be named after how snugly sailors' ships fitted in their ports. Nowhere Else was named because its road went on to nowhere else, and the small town of Penguin was named after the fairy penguins that still inhabit its coast to this day. The names of Tasmania were suggested by Brian Richgruber, and thanks to their suggestion, they will now be honoured as Name Explain's patron saint of the names of Tasmania. Do you have a good idea for some?
I think that's that. Yeah, it's interesting how places are named. He gave a few examples there of the penguin, which is after the fairy penguins that obviously inhabit that area. What are your thoughts? How much did the convicts then have influence on what places were called? Maybe these places were just nicknames and stuck. A little bit like Tasmania was a nickname and stuck. It's an interesting thought because there are plenty of places with names that sound silly. Some clearly were just names that were normal at the time and became funny and weird because times move on. I give you the example of using the word gay. It meant happy and now it means, well, you know what it means. So it's quite funny. Times move on and meanings change, but it's interesting the thought of convicts influencing where they live and what their names of the towns are called. I find it funny. I find it quite funny, the Aboriginal name towns, like Wollongong and things like that, because as I said, I started exploring Australia months ago now, and what I thought Australia was very much a white country. I didn't even think really about the Aboriginals. And this was me being a little bit ignorant because at school we didn't learn about Australia. It's not something we learnt about. So I really did think Australia was just about the white man, if that makes sense. And yeah, to some extent I think it is. I don't think that's me being completely off the radar with it. So to hear places like Wollongong and whatnot, it doesn't sort of match the white man sort of terminology and language. So I find that really quite, I don't know, every time I hear someone say Wollongong, it just fills me with a little bit of joy. Not laugh at, but fills me with a little bit of joy. So it is brilliant to see Australia has so many different place names from all different aspects of people's lives and cultures, and it's brilliant and it is fascinating. So yeah, thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed. Maybe you've learned something. Are you a descendant from a convict? Let me know. And are you proud of that? Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe. I'll catch you next time.